Awesome. All right. So now that we've gotten the housekeeping out of the way, let's jump into our workshop for today. So we're excited to welcome you all and share the space today. And as we mentioned, we want this to be an inclusive and interactive space. So please, at any point, feel free to ask questions, engage in dialogue. Today, we'll be covering the following. We'll go over a brief overview of the Fund for Santa Barbara. We'll share a bit about our funding model and the folks that make the funding decisions. We'll provide an overview of our grant-making programs and funding guidelines and priorities. And we'll review the eligibility criteria and do an in-depth overview of the grant application and cycle timeline, as well as have additional time for questions and answers at the end. By the end, we hope to help you determine whether or not the fund is a good match for your project. Even if we're not a good match for your project, the fund may be able to support you in other ways that we'll cover during the presentation. And just as a quick note, if you're here to learn about general grant writing, this workshop is not going to fill that need, but you can find great resources on how to write a grant on our website. Brian will share the link to the recordings for our Granted series that focuses on grant seeking for progressive social change. Next slide. So let's go ahead and get started. You've already met myself, Tanya, and Brian, but on the screen, we have the rest of our team who work throughout the county. We're a countywide organization and have two offices, one in North County and one in South County. Our current office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we're always happy to have folks come by, but just encourage that if you plan on making a trip to either office, to call ahead to ensure that someone will be there to greet you. Our contact information is available on the Fund for Santa Barbara's website in case you need to get in touch with a specific person on our staff. Next slide. So before we jump into the nuts and bolts for today, we just want to give you a little overview of the Fund for Santa Barbara's history. We've been around for over 40 years, and our mission is to advance progressive change by strengthening movements for economic, environmental, political, racial, and social justice. Our founders were all supporters and activists of different social justice movements who kept seeing a pattern of foundations not supporting their activist-led progressive work. They were unable to find a community-driven foundation that would support their work, so they decided to create it. The fund is a community-driven organization in all senses. For example, we fundraise the dollars that we give out annually, and in that sense, we're much more like our grantees than traditional funders. Also, all of our funding decisions are activist-led. In our model, donors defer funding decisions to activists, which Tanya will share more about in a moment. Next slide. Now, grant making is the most well-known strategy we use to advance progressive change. However, we also help build capacity of progression organizations to help them be bold and effective. In addition to funding, the fund provides non-monetary resources to support community-based organizations. We host educational workshops, offer direct consulting, collect and share resources, and maintain a progressive community calendar of relevant events. We offer a variety of free educational workshops. This month, we're hosting Let's Talk Finance on March 21st, which is actually tonight, in Santa Barbara, and registration for that is filled. But we will be offering the same workshop in Santa Maria in mid-April, with dates still pending. But this is a great opportunity to dive into the nuts and bolts of financial management for organizations from both an internal and external perspective. And we're also co-presenting public advocacy training March 28th in Oxnard and in Santa Barbara on March 29th in conjunction with the Central Coast Civic Engagement Table. And this is a great opportunity to learn how your nonprofit can legally engage in elections, lobbying, and advocacy. And lastly, we're also offering Central Coast Community Organizer training again this year on May 17th, 18th, and 19th. You can keep an eye out for details by signing up for our newsletter and checking our website. We also partner with the Nonprofit Resource Network to share sector-wide resources, and we also offer free one-on-one consulting services for anything nonprofit related. And to access consulting services, you can reach out directly to me to schedule some time. And now with that, I'm going to go and pass it to Tanya to talk about our grant making program.
Thanks, Kathleen. Just elevating that public advocacy workshop is a great one for folks who want to be confident in engaging in that type of work. So highly recommend it. On the screen, you have the grant making committee, and the way that I like to start talking about grant making at the fund is by introducing you all to the fund's grant making committee. As Kathleen mentioned, we have an activist-led participatory decision-making model. This fully empowers the GMC to make the funding decisions and make the most effective use of the money that we fundraise. Fund staff don't have the authority to make funding decisions, which allows us to be able to provide technical support and assistance to applicants. The GMC represent the entire region from North County to South County and provide a range of expertise and firsthand knowledge on issues that affect our community. They are community activists who are on the ground doing the work and understand the of, by, and for approach to supporting historically marginalized community members. I see at least one GMC member on with us today, and I'm going to see if he's able to say hello. JP, are you able to come off mute and say hi? That's a no. Well, JP is one of our co-chairs. He is on the bottom left picture hugging Bob. He's wearing the purple blue type t-shirt. Our other co-chair is Liam Gallo, and the reason why I share this information is because we believe that knowing your audience is an important part of writing a successful proposal. And so if you would like to learn more about them and the work that they do, you can visit our website and read their bios. To talk about grant making, I want to start by giving you a brief overview of all of the grant making programs available at the fund. We currently have 6. The first, and why you're here today, are our single year and multi-year movement building grant programs. The single year movement building grant program is offered annually. Established partners with a significant funding history of at least 3 funding cycles can now apply for up to $20,000. New groups, unincorporated groups, and fiscally sponsored groups can apply for up to 10. And then the multi-year movement building grant program is offered in tandem with a single year movement building grant. And the maximum request for that is $10,000 per year for 3 years for a total of $30,000. Groups interested in applying are subject to initial screening by fund staff. So just get in touch with me and we can determine whether or not you are eligible. We also have the Emerging Needs Grant Program. This is offered year-round until funds are expended. The maximum request is $5,000 for organizing efforts in response to unforeseen circumstances. The length of funding is 3 months, and you can reach out to me to get more information about that one as well. And if you have any unforeseen issues come up, please do contact us. This is precisely what this is for. And then we also have our Youth Making Change grant program, which provides support for youth-led projects. Decisions are made by our Youth Making Change boards. We have 2, one in North County, one in South County. They are between the ages of 13 and 19, and they each grant up to $15,000 annually. And the maximum request for that is $3,000 specifically for youth-led projects. The length of funding is 6 months, and I highly encourage you to keep this grant opportunity in mind if your organization has a youth component with some youth-led initiatives. You can also reach out to YMC at fund4santaBarbara.org to get more information about our Youth Making Change grants. And finally, the last 2 field of interest funding programs. The first is the Racial Equity Fund of the County of Santa Barbara. It's offered in collaboration with the county and is typically available in the winter. We try to make it available around November. The maximum request for that is up to $100,000, and this is for organizations or groups that are addressing racism through anti-racist systems change strategies. Organizations have to already be doing the work. New initiatives will not be considered. And then finally, we have the Mickey Flack Social Housing Fund grant opportunity. It's available for organizations or groups advocating for and actively leading social housing justice campaigns in Santa Barbara County. There are 4 different funding categories that groups can apply under. It's also open year-round, very similar to our Emerging Needs Grant program. Groups interested in applying are subject to an initial screening by fund staff, and the maximum request is up to $5,000 for up to 12 months, depending on the time frame that folks need. If you are doing housing justice type work, please keep this opportunity in mind, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Information about all of our funding programs is shared via our email list. I think Kathleen may have mentioned it earlier, but if you didn't take her up on it, I encourage you to sign up for our listserv so that you don't miss any future funding opportunities. And Brian just dropped the link to that in the chat. So in order to be eligible for all of our funding programs, all applicants must meet our funding guidelines and priorities, which have a recurring theme of creating systemic social change. And so before I get into those, I'm going to hand it back to Kathleen to talk about systemic social change and what that means at the fund.
Thanks, Tanya. So by now you've heard us mention that our mission is to advance progressive change by strengthening movements for economic, environmental, political, racial, and social justice, and that we support requests with a strong systemic social change component. But you may be wondering, what does that mean? At the fund, we define social change as change that addresses the root causes of social inequities, including economic, environmental, political, and racial, to not only alleviate those inequities, but also the underlying conditions and circumstances that cause and sustain them. Projects with a strong social change component will be working to change the conditions that uphold systems of structures that disadvantage marginalized groups. Typically, we think of this in contrast to charity or direct service projects that provide a direct service without addressing the root cause of the issue. Think Soup Kitchen versus advocacy for a living wage ordinance so that people can actually afford to purchase their own food. You'll recall that our founders wanted to fund progressive social justice movements that were typically overlooked by other foundations and lacked access to funding. I'll pass it back to Tanya to talk more about these funding guidelines.
Thanks, Kathleen. So now that we understand how the fund defines social change, let's go over the funding guidelines with that lens. These are on the screen are the funding guidelines that all applicants must meet to apply for funding from us. All of our programs adhere to these guidelines. Your project should address or align with at least one. Strong projects will align with several. These tie back to our mission, just like Kathleen said, to support systemic social change work that addresses the root causes of social inequities. So we invite applications that from applicants that actively support anti-discrimination of all types. This list that you have on the screen is not exhaustive. We invite applications from organizations supporting any type of anti-discrimination work. And we encourage proposals that are intersectional and inclusive. Next, actively support marginalized communities to engage in actions that seek to counter social injustices. Examples of this are trainings for parents or youth or farm workers on how to realize their power to affect change on issues that directly affect them. Actively work to improve the rights of marginalized workers and their families, and promote the cultural life of underserved communities and support the activities of cultural workers. Some examples include the Guelaguetza group in Santa Maria, or Juneteenth in Santa Barbara, or the MLK celebration in Lompoc. Next is promote self-determination and leadership development in low-income and disenfranchised communities, and promote global peace and organize for just policies. Examples of current issues are, women's reproductive rights or climate change or gun control. Next, work on building coalitions to improve environmental justice and address climate change, especially those organizing a constituency, usually without access to decision makers. We really are committed to removing barriers and providing support to folks with lived experiences and centering the people who are most affected. Next is engage in collaborative action and coalition building to strengthen movement ecosystems. We do believe that a key component of real change is movement building, and we strongly support coalition building and cross-movement solidarity. We're not being prescriptive about it. We're not saying you have to be collaborating or involved in a coalition work, but we do believe that strong movement building work is supported by this type of work. Next is work against community violence and support restorative justice initiatives. And finally, we invite proposals that operate in a democratic manner responsive to, and directed by the constituency being served. This to us means that the folks directly impacted by the injustices should be involved in the strategy and program development and have decision-making capacity. So now Kathleen will go over the funding priorities.
Should probably come on. Thanks, Tanya. The grant making committee uses the funding priorities to guide their proposal review and base their funding assessment. They align with the fund's values and mission. The first is, of course, the guidelines, which are part of the priorities they take into consideration. They want to know, does this project have the potential to create or advance movements for social, economic, political, racial, and/or environmental change? They'll prioritize projects with elements of community organizing, lobbying, direct action, base building, coalition building, or legal strategy. They want to know, does the project address the root causes of the issue? They'll also look at access to funding, asking, does this project lack access to traditional funding? Would the project go forward without support from the fund? Remember, the fund and the grant-making committee prioritize grassroots organizing groups that lack access to traditional sources of funding, or that use strategies that are typically overlooked by mainstream philanthropy, like legal strategies, lobbying, and direct action, policy and advocacy type work. They take into consideration whether the nature of the project is so new or controversial that its chances of receiving funding elsewhere are limited. An example would be DEI initiatives. Prior to 2020, DEI initiatives were not as popular as they are today. However, nowadays there is significant support available, and we would likely refer you to seek funding from other foundations. The GMC also considers critical timing and need. They ask if the organization has the capacity to reach its social change. Are the key players familiar with other organizations in the same field to further the goal of movement building? They also assess impact of funds, asking how clear is the budget outline? How well does the budget support the project's social change goals? Will funding help start up the organization, stabilize the organization, and/or leverage other funding sources? And lastly, they look at regional equity. Will this project help the GMC achieve its objective of providing equity and funding throughout Santa Barbara County? Now, we've talked quite a bit about what we do fund, but let's also talk for a minute about what we do not fund. At the Fund for Santa Barbara, we do not fund political campaigns that support a candidate or a political party. However, we do typically fund C3s and C4s lobbying or advocating for ballot measures, except for our racial equity funding. If you're interested in engaging your organization in lobbying or advocating, again, I encourage you to attend the public advocacy training at the end of March. And Stanley actually just arrived, so he can share more information again as well, I'm sure. We also do not fund private interest. We do not fund direct labor organizing. We do not fund direct support to individuals. Remember, our motto is change, not charity. We do not fund building improvements, nor capital ventures such as vehicles. We also do not fund office equipment such as machines, computers, etc. And lastly, we do not fund projects located outside of Santa Barbara County. Now, to be eligible for funding, let's take a moment to talk about the minimum eligibility criteria with Tanya.
Thanks, Kathleen. And I dropped it in the chat, folks, but if anyone does have any questions at any point, we do want this to be an interactive and inclusive space, so feel free to pause us and ask questions or drop them in the chat. We'll try to keep track of them. But this workshop really is for you, so we want you to be able to maximize the benefits. So in addition to meeting our funding guidelines and priorities, requests must also meet our eligibility criteria. On the screen, you have the minimum qualifications that all applicants must meet to be eligible for funding from any of our programs. First, as we just covered, all applicants must meet the funding guidelines and priorities, i.e. have a systemic social change component. Applicants must also have a tax ID if applying with tax exempt status or as a fiscally sponsored organization, or an EIN number if applying as unincorporated. And then applicants must have an organizational bank account or a fiscal sponsors, and must not be currently funded by the fund, with a couple of exceptions. And then the budget and planned activities must fall within the funding timeframe of the request. For the movement building grant funding, program. The term is 12 months from August to August. So all budget and planned activities must fall within that 12-month time frame. We also do not fund retroactively. Now, specific to the Movement Building Grant Program, starting in 2024, there are 2 tiers of funding that grant seekers can apply for. To be eligible to apply for up to $20,000, applicants must have a significant funding history of 3 cycles of more with the fund. This includes general cycles, multi-year cycles, and racial equity fund cycles. Emerging needs grants and Mickey Flack social housing grants do not qualify for this requirement. If you have any questions about this for your specific orgs, please feel free to email me. I think Brian will drop my email in the chat, and we can see if you're eligible to what tier you're eligible for. And then new applicants, unincorporated groups, and fiscally sponsored groups may continue to apply for up to $10,000. For the movement building or the multi-year movement building grant program, folks must have a significant funding history with the fund of at least 3 general cycles. It's the same restriction as those seeking to apply for $20,000 from the single year. Your budget and planned activities must fall within a 3-year funding time frame. So we'll ask you to give us each year of activities and financial information. And finally, the multi-year applications are not available to the general public. If you wish to apply for a multi-year grant, please email me to see if you're eligible. But ideally, if you have at least 3 funding cycles under your belt, then you should be able to apply for multi-year funding. And then this is just to elevate that all of our grant making history is available on our website, or in recent history. I think we go back to 2017 or 2018. If you are trying to determine whether or not your project fits with the fund, you can explore an extensive list of all the projects that we have recently funded on our website. And Brian has already dropped the link in the chat for that. So we'll get into the movement building grant cycles. And I'm going to pass it back to Kathleen to share more about the timeline.
Thanks, Tanya. So as Tanya covered, we are changing up our grant making for 2024 here at the Fund for Santa Barbara. So really just want to emphasize what this new cycle timeline will look like. And a copy of this timeline is available for download on the grantee portal on our website. And we really encourage you to save it so that you can refer to it down the road. We opened our request for proposals last Friday on March 15th. The fund offers an optional proposal review, which I'll be covering on the next slide. And the deadline to submit those is April 8th by 5 p.m. The request for proposals closes on April 15th at 11:59 p.m. But we really strongly encourage you to submit well before the deadline. After a review process with the grant making committee, funding announcements will be made in late July and grants will be awarded in August. If you're awarded a grant, we will ask you to submit 2 grant reports. The first being a progress report that will be due 6 months after the award, and a final report that will be due at the end of the 12-month funding term, or when funds are expended, whichever comes first. Next slide. Now, as we mentioned, the fund offers an optional pre-application review for prospective applicants. This is an opportunity to have fund staff review and provide feedback on your proposed request. To take advantage of this opportunity, you must submit a 1-page maximum summary of your proposal that clearly tells us what you're trying to accomplish, a list of key organizers and participants, a draft of your budget, and to submit this via email by 5 p.m. on April 8th to grants@fundforsantabarbara.org. We really encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity if you're having trouble determining whether your project is a good fit for funding here at the fund. Next slide. As you also saw on the timeline, site visits are a part of our cycle that happens later in the process. The site visit is an informal interview for the grant making committee to learn more about your request in your own words. The grant making committee will determine who will be receiving a site visit. And if your project is selected, GMC members will contact you directly to set up a site visit. Each site visit interview team will have 2 grant making committee members and a fund staff member. They'll ask to meet with 3 to 4 members of your choice from your organization. Now, the term site visit can be misleading. You do not need to have a physical space for this. All you need is a quiet place where you can converse with the GMC. And these site visits can be held in person at a site of your choice or virtually over Zoom. Now that we've talked a bit about the timeline and what the process entails, Tanya is going to walk you through our grant portal and how to actually get your grant submitted.
Yeah, the fun stuff. So I will first go over the portal itself, and then we'll jump into the application and go through that in detail. So we do have an entirely electronic grant process here at the fund. And like I said, I'll show you how to access the portal in a moment. To submit a grant application, you will need to create a free submittable account. That's our grants portal that houses our programming. Please use the email that is linked to the organization that you're going to be submitting the request for. And know that the email that you use will be our primary point of contact with you. And then just note that the grants platform is not supported by Internet Explorer. If you do use Internet Explorer, please use a different one like Chrome or Firefox for this. Otherwise, you won't be able to get it to work properly. And then there are some key benefits to having an electronic process. One being that it allows you to collaborate with your colleagues. And then just note that collaborators cannot submit the application. Only the person who initiates the form from the beginning is going to be able to submit it, but collaborators can go in and do everything else with you. There's also an autosave feature that allows you to save drafts and come back to them whenever you want, as well as a save draft option that I will show you once we get in there. If you find the application to not be accessible to your needs and would like technical assistance, please email me for support. We want the application to be accessible for everyone, and I'm happy to troubleshoot or connect you with submittable customer service if that's the accessibility needs. Moving on, we will jump into the application the application itself. So let's show you all how to get there. And most of you have already probably initiated your application. You'll come to our website, you'll go to the grantee portal. This is the grantee portal landing page. From here, you'll go to submit application, and then you'll be redirected to our grants portal. And then you'll scroll down, you'll see, our funding guidelines, our priorities, what we do not fund. At the very bottom, you'll see any current funding opportunities available. You can click on apply. And then if you're not signed in at this point, it will ask you to log in. Mine was already logged in, which is why it skipped that part. Once you are logged in, the first thing that we're going to collect from you is your tax ID and or EIN number. Let me zoom this in. There we go. And then once you enter that, it'll ask you to find your organization. You'll find your organization, and then the next thing that will take you through is going to be a brief eligibility survey, and this is going to be to ensure that you have a clear understanding of what the fund supports. It's very simple, just a couple questions, and it pertains to the funding guidelines and priorities. There are some check boxes that must be checked in that eligibility survey in order to be considered eligible. And the form itself will not remind you, so I'm reminding you now. If you see those check boxes, remember to read through them and check them off. And then once you get that out of the way, then this is the landing page that you will see when you begin your application. At the top in green, you'll see the form name and the deadline for the application. And then the guidelines, the priorities, what we do not fund, and the eligibility will stay there throughout the time that you are working on your application. So if you need to reference our guidelines at any point, you're going to be able to do that by scrolling up on your application. This is where once you have entered your EIN, like I said, it's the first thing we collect. It'll say here, like, you're applying on behalf of, I use the fund's EIN, so this is what you're seeing as me applying on behalf of the fund. And then if you keep scrolling down on the right-hand corner here, you'll see the Managing Collaborators button. It's a little person. You can click on that and then go ahead and enter the emails of the people that you'd like to invite to collaborate with you on the application. You see, again, the title of the application, the grant term. Movement Building Grant is from August 2024 to August 2025. And then we also have a link to an application checklist that we created to help you basically a tool to help you gather everything you're going to need to apply. The first section that you're going to see is going to be the general information section. There's a couple other things I want to point out here. One being that all required items are going to have a little red asterisk with them that is going to indicate that they're required. The word limits to any of the questions are going to be on the bottom right-hand corner, and then additional clues that pertain to what we are trying to gather are going to be below the text box in gray. So look for those clues. They're there to help guide you. And for example, with this one, the first question that is being asked of you is to draft an executive summary of your proposal. And because this form, you don't have to go in order, I actually encourage folks to come back and fill this out at the end after you've completed drafting the rest of your proposal. And that's written in here for you. So that's how you can kind of use the clues. So the next section is going to be the primary contact information. This is the form owner's contact information, the person who created and initiated the form. And remember that this is going to be the key contact person for all proposal-related communications. Then we have organization information. This is going to ask for the legal name of your organization or group. And then if you are applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, please enter the name of your organization here. We'll ask for your fiscal sponsor's name further down. And then the project name, just give your request whatever kind of name that you want to name it. And then we'll ask for your tax exempt status. So if your group is a tax exempt organization, you have 501c3 or 501c4 status, you can select yes and then follow those prompts. If you do not, then you can say no, and then we'll ask you if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor. If you are a fiscally sponsored organization, you can say yes, and then follow those prompts. And then if you are not, then you will have the option to apply as an unincorporated group. For the purposes of today, I'm going to go ahead and say that I am applying with a fiscal sponsor. Here I would put the fund's actual name, not the nickname of the fund. And then I would select their fiscal sponsor, or their tax exempt status, which is 501c3. The tax ID number is already being pulled because I entered it right at the beginning before initiating the application. And then we'll ask you if the organization has been funded by the fund before. If you have, you can say yes and follow those prompts, or if you have not, I know that there's some new folks in the room today, you can say no and then move on. And finally, we'll ask for the organization bank account name. If you are a fiscally sponsored organization, you're going to be putting the organization bank account name of your fiscal sponsor. Further down, we'll ask for your organization address. We want to know where your organization is located. If your organization has a separate mailing address, we'll ask for that as well. And then we'll also ask for your organization's phone number, website, and social media handle. Notice that these are not required. If you do not have those, if you are a just starting up grassroots group, don't panic. They're not required. This is just us trying to get to know you. If you have a fiscal sponsor, which I indicated that I did, then I would include my fiscal sponsor's address here. And finally, I will ask for a fiscal sponsor's email, and this is strictly for bank account information. We have transitioned over from paper checks to electronic transfers, so we will need to contact someone in the fiscal sponsor's organization so that we can get that set up. Further down, we get into the request specific information. So this is where we're going to learn more about your specific request. The first thing we're going to ask you is to ground us in and tell us what you'll be asking the funds and what they will be used for. We'll ask you for the amount you are requesting. Here, there's going to be a clue depending on whether you are eligible to apply for up to 20 or up to 10. I am applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, which we know is a maximum of $10,000, which is why I'm getting this message here. And then it'll ask you to check the box, move down, type of request. If you are applying for general operating support, you can select that. If you are applying for a specific program or project, you can select that, and then your total request budget is going to be reflective of that. So Total request budget for general operating support is going to be your organization's budget. And then for a specific program or project is going to be the budget specific to that program or project. The request budget period start and end dates. These are yours, again, not your fiscal sponsors, and then your organization annual operating budget. As I mentioned, if you are applying for general operating support, this budget amount and this budget amount, the request budget and the organizational operating budget are going to be the same amounts. And then your fiscal year start. Further down, we are looking for you to identify the issue areas that are specific to your request. This isn't everything that your organization engages in. This is very specific to what the request is. You can select from the list of items that are available, or you can click on other down here and then tell us what specifics that may be missing from the list. Similarly, the request specific strategy, we have some strategies there for you, but if you have others that are not listed, you're welcome to click on other and then tell us what those are as well. Constituency being served, same deal. And then request specific geography. If you are an organization that is working, whatever the request is going to be serving constituency countywide, you can click on countywide and move on. However, if you are located in a specific location and it's going to be supporting the folks that live there, then you can say, for example, North County, and focus your efforts in maybe Cuyama if you are one of those organizations. Then we'll ask you for your site visit information. We'll ask you if the person who is submitting the proposal should be contacted for a site visit. If the answer is yes, you can say yes and move on. If the answer is no, then we'll ask you for their contact information. And then we'll ask you for the best days and times for a site visit. Please note that our grant making committee is composed of volunteer activists who have day jobs, and we do ask for you to be very flexible in this space. And if you are able to provide any evening opportunities, even if it's just one or two, that could be really helpful in helping the grant making committee be able to accommodate all of the site visits that they have to do. And then remember that these interviews, they're informal and they are strictly for the GMC to learn more about your request directly from you in your own words. The next part is going to be the request narrative. This is like the beefiest part of the application. This is where you're going to really let your words come through and shine. There are a couple things that I want to point out. So first, I want to help you by letting you know that you should focus on the specific questions that are being asked and draft succinct answers. I encourage you to break down the question and be very specific in answering those questions so that you don't get lost in the weeds. Remember that the GMC have to read all of the applications that we receive, and we don't want them to have to sift through lots of words to understand your request. You want them to be able to understand it clearly and articulate why they support your request. And then for best practices, avoid using jargon and acronyms and use language that non-experts can easily understand. The first question is going to ask you to outline your proposal and describe your request history. This is your opportunity to give the grant making committee all of the background information and lay out the foundation for your request. Summarize how your request came to be and what your actual request is. Make sure that you really understand the guidelines and the priorities, and talk about the strategies that you're going to be employing or plan to employ for this specific request. And if this request has been previously funded by the fund, tell us how additional funding would support building on previous efforts. Then we'll ask you to tell us how this request is social change rather than traditional charity or direct services. Remember, we are looking to support projects with a strong social change component. Be explicit about how this request is promoting systemic social change. The GMC will prioritize projects that address systemic change. Then we'll ask you to describe how the request is enhancing community capacity to build and mobilize power. The grant-making committee will prioritize projects that promote movement building and coalition building, as I mentioned earlier when we reviewed the guidelines. They'll ask, are you working to bridge the gap between silos and working together with other groups? They want to see if and how you're partnering with other organizations doing similar work and not producing duplicative work. The question is asking you to show that you know the community and also to be transparent. If you're not working with others, that's okay. Tell us what are the challenges keeping you from working with others. Where was I? And then if you are actively working with community partners, we'll ask you to tell us how. Again, notice this is not a required field, but if you are, you can click, for example, cooperating, and then you can tell us what organizations you're cooperating with. Then we'll ask you to describe your organizational structure and governance, how decisions are made and priorities set for your groups. So here you'll want to talk about how involved your constituency is in the decision-making process and how they affect the work that you do. The grant-making committee wants to know, are marginalized individuals leaders of the group, and are they directly involved in the decision-making and planning process? Are you working directly with the community to move this project forward, or are you being prescriptive and telling them what they need? The GMC will prioritize projects with community buy-in and partnerships where the constituency is part of the decision-making group. And they do not want to see proposals where people from the community are not involved. We'll ask you to list 2 references of your choice who understand your request and can speak to it. And then we will get into the activity timeline. So the activity timeline, a good way to differentiate between objective and activity is that objectives are what you're going to do or hope to accomplish, and then the activity is how you are actually going to get that done. The activities should help you achieve your objectives. And the activities and objectives should support the narrative of the proposal. And then as you're completing your activity timeline, you should also be thinking about your budget. Your budget is your activities in a different form. Sometimes it's very helpful to work on those side by side. We'll ask you to tell us what the anticipated outcomes are and how you will evaluate the effectiveness and impact. For this question, think about what is going to be different by virtue of you carrying out this request. What is the change that you seek to make and how you will evaluate whether that change took place or not. Applicants get to set their own determinants of success. Evaluation can be very simple. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Just tell us where your starting point is and where you expect to be at the end. And we also understand that outcomes look different for each applicant, and we want you to tell us what they look like to you. Be clear, be realistic, and be feasible. And then how will the request benefits and outcomes strengthen your organization's mission? How will your organization keep the benefits ongoing? Here, you'll want to articulate how it relates to your organization's mission and connect the dots for the GMC. And then also the project does not have to be ongoing, but if it is, tell us how you plan to keep the benefits ongoing. We're down to the financial information section of the application. First question is going to ask you to identify major fundraising strategies of your organization for this request. And then here, a strategy is a specific plan of action to raise funds for the request. Activities are the specific ways in which these strategies are going to be carried out. And then what resources, aside from funding, does your organization have access to and or need? For what you have access to, the GMC is looking at what kind of community buy-in does your project have? Does your board participate in your work? Who are your advocates and supporters for this request within the community? It doesn't have to be monetary support. It can be in-kind donations, like perhaps a constituent lending you their space to host meetings. And really, this is your opportunity to flex your muscle on how you've been resourceful and creative with the resources that have been available to you. For the resources that you need, this information helps us influence philanthropy. We can convey community needs to our philanthropic partners and other foundations. And it really does help us advocate on your behalf. So please be open and honest and transparent here with any resources that you need. It allows us to be responsive to your needs when we create technical assistance as well. Kathleen will take that into consideration when we're putting together workshops and capacity building and materials. And then remember that if you have specific technical assistance needs, you can always reach out to Kathleen, who is our capacity building manager, to get personalized support. Brian will drop her link, her email in the chat for you all again. We're down to the financial information and expense tables. It's one table divided into two sections. This table will never refer to your fiscal sponsor's budget. This is specific to your request. And this is where you translate your activities into dollars. Like I said, I recommend keeping a running sheet as you're identifying your activities that you plan to do and thinking about the specifics of what you're going to need and how much it's going to cost you. Excuse me. Personal supplies, etc. The first section is going to be the income section. This is where you're going to list all of the income for this specific request. And then the second section is going to be where you list the expenses. The table is set to auto sum in the amount sections. As long as you don't add any special characters, it will be tallying it up for you here. So as you're adding your income sources, it will be adding them up for you here. And then, where was I? Oh, I actually have a sample that is linked for you in the application that I'm gonna pop open right now. It's a pre-filled out sample to give you just general idea of what you could potentially be utilizing as you're filling it out. This is a sample for a general operating support of $10,000. So in the top part, like I said, it's this income section. Here you can list possible funding sources. We have some in yellow for you. And then you'll list them here. Month and year when they're anticipated is on the third column. And then, like I said, amounts. Just don't add any special characters so that the total income will automatically add up. Because this is a general operating support, this is also reflective of my organizational budget, which in this case would be $190,000. The second half is going to be the expenses category. This is where you will be noting any of the expenses that you foresee for your specific request. In the first column, you're going to write the actual categories and items. I have some listed here as well as more listed in this yellow area for you to pull from. The really important part for you here is going to be the notes and explanation column, the second column. That's going to be where the GMC is going to be able to understand really what the need is and how and in full detail. It goes a long way to take full advantage of this and give the grant making committee as much detail and breakdown of the expenses as possible so that they don't have any questions as they're reviewing the application. And the third column is going to be the money you're specifically requesting from the fund. It should match the amount that is requested of the whole proposal. Mine, as a fiscally sponsored organization, I'm requesting $10,000. This is the amount that I'm requesting from the fund. It's $10,000. Obviously, that's not the total expense amount for all of the requests, which is a general operating support, and that's going to total my $190,000. There is a little zero that I'll show you back once I jump back into the application. But if you are able to balance these numbers out, this little zero will balance itself out and stay at zero. If these are not equal, which they should be, then it's gonna give you a number other than zero, and we'll ask you to come back and fix that. Any questions about the budget table before I keep going? All right, if any questions do come up, like I said, feel free to chime in. So that table, like I said, is linked here for you in the application. That auto sum zero number that I mentioned is here right now. It is balancing out at zero because my total expense amount and my total income amount are equal to each other. More clues for you. It's all the information I just mentioned, but just remember to pay attention to those clues. They really are there to help you and help guide you in drafting a successful proposal. Then we'll ask, does the total income and total expense amounts match and balance out to zero? In this case, like I said, they do, and that is the number, the magic zero number that you're looking for. If you say they do not, it will ask you to go back and correct that error. And then you'll confirm that the total amount requested from the fund matches the request of the proposal. That would be this number here. It should match the amount that you're requesting within that proposal. Like I said, it's this one here. Going further down, my computer froze, give it a second. I'm moving faster. Okay. Then we'll ask you to list your top 3 priorities. You know your request better than we do, and we don't want to decide for you what your priorities are. Here you'll want to put them in priority order, number 1 being the utmost priority, and so on and so forth. We'll ask you if this request has been funded by foundations other than the fund. You can just say yes or no. This is to help us understand funding trends within the community and the larger scope of philanthropy. And then we'll ask you to list any past funding sources for this request, and you can add them here. Oh, something I didn't mention is there is, like, instead of drafting like a full paragraph in this section, for example, you could use a dot list and do it that way, so you don't have to draft a full paragraph. There's different little icons here that you're able to use as you're drafting your text responses. Second to last part is going to be the additional information section. Sorry, I read Stanley's comment. I'm like, yeah, I like good lists too. Thanks, Stanley.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but they're great.
No, it's good. It's good. So here you'll list all key participants involved in the request. All requests, regardless of whether you're tax exempt or fiscally sponsored or unincorporated, will ask for this list. And then for your group as well, will also ask for your board of directors if you're tax exempt, or your governing body if you're unincorporated. So the leaders who are leading that group. And then we'll ask you if your leadership reflects the community that you aim to serve. You know, that's part of the whole deal here at the fund. We're looking for constituency-led work. So there's some options available to you, but you're welcome to click on other and tell us other options that are not readily available. And then those of you who will be applying as a fiscally sponsored organization will ask for the list of board of directors of that fiscal sponsor as well. You can list them here. And then we'll ask you for a copy of your IRS tax exempt determination letter if you're fiscally sponsored or if you have a tax exempt status. If you don't know what letter we're looking for, we have a sample linked here that you're welcome to click on so that you know exactly what we are looking for. Similarly, we'll ask you to upload a copy of your State of California Franchise Tax Board determination letter. There's also a sample linked here. If you are an unincorporated group, we will not be asking you for these two, and instead we'll ask you for a statement of charitable purpose for your group. We'll also ask you for your organization logo. Notice that this is not a required field. If you don't have an organization logo, that's okay, don't panic. And then finally, we'll ask you to give us an optional attachment of your choice. And the idea is to have this optional attachment be something that will help the grant making committee understand your request better. The very last part is going to be the acknowledgement and disclaimer. This is where you're going to sign your name, give us the date, and then you're also going to be sending an endorsement request to a member of your board of directors if you're tax exempt, or if you are unincorporated, then it's going to go to a member of the group of leaders, the governing body of your group. And then if you are a fiscally sponsored organization, this is going to go to a member of the board of directors of the fiscal sponsors organization. And then this should theoretically go to either the board president or the treasurer, who know about the finances in the organization. All of that I just said is added here, and the little clue in gray for you, in case that was confusing, because I confused myself. The very last part is going to be the save draft button that you are welcome to come to at any time if you need to hop off. And then once you have everything completed, there's also the apply button. One thing I forgot to mention is in the narrative portion, those chunkier text portions, we do obviously have the safe draft feature. However, because technology can be finicky, I still encourage folks to work on a separate Word doc for those questions only, just to be abundantly cautious and so that no information of yours gets lost. That is the application we just walked through. I can take us back to the presentation, but is there any questions before I jump off of the application that I can address? Okay, well, if there isn't, then we have made it to the question and answer portion anyway. And if there are no questions, then I'll put this screen up on for you. So general writing questions and technical assistance support, that's going to be Kathleen. And then cycle information specific to the movement building grant cycle, you can email me. And we'll be around. Feel free to stick around with questions. Otherwise, I will say thank you so much for being here this morning. We appreciate you joining us, and we really do look forward to seeing your proposals come in. Use our resources, optional review, for example, or technical assistance from Kathleen, and yeah, April 14th, don't miss that deadline.